The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty floor of the small cabin on the edge of Dust Ridge. Clara Whitmore wrung out a cloth in the wash basin, the water already lukewarm from the desert heat that crept in through the thin walls. She moved to her mother's bedside, gently dabbing the fevered brow of the woman who had given everything to raise her alone. "Rest now, Mama," Clara whispered, smoothing back the gray strands that clung to her mother's damp forehead. Margaret Whitmore's eyes fluttered open, clouded with the pain that had become her constant companion these past months. "My sweet girl," Margaret rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have to." "Hush now," Clara interrupted, forcing a smile that didn't reach her hazel eyes. "Everything's going to be just fine." But as Clara gazed out the window at the barren landscape beyond, she knew the truth was far more complicated. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Silas Trenton, wife to the wealthiest rancher in the county. It wasn't love that would lead her down the aisle of the small chapel. It was desperation, pure and simple. Silas had agreed to pay for her mother's medical care, the expensive treatments from the doctor who rode in from Fort Worth every month. Without his money, her mother would surely die. Clara stood and walked to the kitchen area, her worn boots clicking against the floorboards. She picked up the wedding dress hanging on a peg by the door, a simple ivory gown that had belonged to Silas's first wife, now altered to fit Clara's slender frame. The fabric felt heavy in her hands, weighted with the future she was about to accept. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when she allowed her guard to drop. Eli Carter, with his crooked smile and eyes the color of sage honey, promising her the world as they sat by Miller's Creek all those years ago. They'd been barely more than children then, but their love had been real as the desert wind that now rattled the window panes. "I'll build us a house right here," Eli had said, gesturing to the cottonwood grove by the water. "Nothing fancy, but it'll be ours. You, me, and whatever little ones the Lord sees fit to bless us with." Clara had laughed then, her 16-year-old heart so full of hope it might have burst. "And what'll we live on? Eli Carter, dreams and creek water? I'll work the Patterson Ranch, save every penny. In a few years, we'll have enough for our own small spread." "You'll see, Clara, I promise you." But that was before the Apache raids increased, before Eli joined the group of men riding out to protect the settlements. 3 years ago, only half the party had returned. Eli wasn't among them. The survivors spoke of an ambush in Devil's Canyon, of men cut down in a hail of arrows and gunfire. No bodies were recovered. The Apache had seen to that. Clara shook her head, banishing the memories. She had mourned Eli, mourned until she thought she might die from the grief of it. But life had continued its merciless march forward, and her mother's illness had forced her to be practical. When Silas Trenton had begun calling on her 6 months ago, she'd seen it for what it was, a transaction. Her youth and beauty for his money and protection. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the window, she saw 3 riders approaching, dust clouds billowing in their wake. She recognized Silas's bay stallion immediately, his imposing figure unmistakable even at a distance. The 2 ranch hands flanking him were ever-present shadows, their hands never far from their holsters. Clara quickly smoothed her simple calico dress and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She opened the door before Silas could knock, knowing he disliked being kept waiting. "Clara," Silas said, removing his black hat. He was a handsome man in a cold sort of way, with sharp features and gray eyes that never seemed to warm, even when he smiled. "You look lovely today." "Thank you, Mr. Trenton," she replied, stepping aside to let him enter. She'd given up asking him to call her Miss Whitmore. He'd made it clear that such formalities would soon be unnecessary. Silas glanced toward the corner where her mother lay sleeping. His nose wrinkled slightly at the smell of sickness that permeated the small space. But he said nothing. Instead, he pulled a small velvet box from his vest pocket. "I brought you something," he said, opening it to reveal a golden wedding band set with small diamonds. "It was my grandmother's. I thought you should have it before the ceremony." Clara stared at the ring, its brilliance almost obscene in the humble cabin. It's beautiful, Silas, but I couldn't—" "Nonsense." His voice brooked no argument. "You'll be my wife in 3 days. It's only fitting you should wear the Trenton jewels." He took her hand, his grip firm, and slid the ring onto her finger. It was too loose, spinning freely around her slender digit. "We'll have it sized in Fort Worth after the wedding," he said, seemingly satisfied. "I've arranged for us to spend a week there. By the time we return, your mother will be settled in the main house with a full-time nurse to tend to her." Clara nodded, the ring's weight unfamiliar on her hand. "You're very generous, Silas." He stepped closer, his cologne failing to mask the scent of horses and leather that clung to him. "I take care of what's mine. Clara, remember that." After he left, Clara sat beside her mother once more, turning the ring on her finger. Outside, the wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across the yard. The vast expanse of the Texas plains stretched endlessly beyond their small homestead, a sea of brown grass and red earth beneath an unforgiving sun. She closed her eyes and allowed herself one last moment of memory. Eli's laugh, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the promises they'd whispered beneath the stars. Then she opened her eyes and faced reality. Eli was gone, and she had responsibilities. Her mother needed her to be strong, to do whatever was necessary to ensure her care. As the afternoon wore on, Clara busied herself with chores, trying not to think about the wedding preparations happening in town. The ladies of Dustridge were no doubt gossiping over their needlework, speculating about why a girl like Clara Whitmore would marry a man like Silas Trenton. They all knew the answer, of course, but propriety demanded they pretend otherwise. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When Clara made her way to the well for the evening's water, the old rope was rough against her palms as she lowered the bucket, the familiar rhythm of the task soothing in its simplicity. She didn't notice the figure watching from the shadow of the barn until she'd hauled the bucket back up. When she did, she nearly dropped it in shock. A man stood there, tall and lean, his face obscured by the dying light. But something about his stance, the way he held himself. Clara's heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The man stepped forward, and the last rays of sunlight illuminated features that had changed. Sharper, harder, marked by years of survival, but were unmistakably familiar. "Hello, Clara," Eli Carter said, his voice rough as desert sand. The bucket slipped from Clara's numb fingers, water spilling across the dusty ground. She stared at the ghost before her, unable to speak, unable to breathe. He was supposed to be dead. She had mourned him, buried him in her heart, forced herself to move on. But there he stood, solid and real, wearing clothes that had seen better days and a gun belt that spoke of hard living. His honey-colored eyes held shadows she'd never seen before, and a scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from whatever hell he'd survived. You're dead," she finally whispered. A bitter smile touched his lips. "There were times I wished I was." The wedding dress hanging in the cabin seemed to mock them both, a specter of the future Clara had resigned herself to. 3 days. In 3 days, she would belong to another man, and this ghost from her past would have to remain just that, a ghost. But as Eli took another step toward her, Clara felt the carefully constructed walls around her heart begin to crumble. The boy she'd loved was gone, but in his place stood a man forged by fire and loss, and heaven help her. She could already feel herself falling all over again. Word spread through Dustridge like wildfire across dry prairie grass. By the next morning, everyone knew that Eli Carter had returned from the dead. Women whispered behind their fans at the general store. Men gathered in clusters outside the saloon, and children peered around their mothers' skirts at the man who'd become legend. Clara hadn't slept. She'd spent the night sitting by her mother's bedside, reliving those few moments by the well over and over. The shock in Eli's eyes when he'd seen the ring on her finger. The way he'd turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he'd appeared. Now, as she made her way down Main Street to fetch her mother's medicine, she felt the weight of every stare, heard every hushed conversation that died as she passed. Mrs. Henderson, the pastor's wife, actually crossed to the other side of the street to avoid her. "Clara!" She stopped, her heart hammering. Eli stood in the doorway of the blacksmith's shop, his tall frame backlit by the forge's glow. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the deep tan that spoke of years under unforgiving suns, the lean muscle that replaced boyish softness, the wariness in his movements like a wild animal ready to bolt. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "There's nothing to say." She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "You've been dead for 3 years. Eli, I mourned you. We all did." His jaw tightened. "I know. Do you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Do you know what it was like? They told us about the ambush, about how no one could have survived. I waited. Eli, I waited for months, hoping they were wrong, that you'd walk through my door just like you did last night. Clara, no." She took a shaky breath. "You don't get to just appear and act like nothing's changed. Where were you? Where have you been all this time?" Eli glanced around at the curious faces, pretending not to watch them. "Not here. Too many ears." Against her better judgment, Clara followed him behind the blacksmith's shop, where a small grove of mesquite trees offered some privacy. The familiar scent of his presence, leather and sage and something uniquely Eli, made her chest ache. "The Apache didn't kill us that day," he began, his voice rough. "They took us captive instead. Me and Samuel Morrison, the others." He shook his head. "The others weren't so lucky." Clara's anger wavered. "Samuel? But his wife remarried last spring." "Can't blame her. By the time I escaped, it had been near 2 years. Samuel, he didn't make it out with me." Eli's eyes went distant, seeing something she couldn't. "The Apache aren't the savages people make them out to be. They had their reasons for the raids. Settlers pushing into their hunting grounds, the army breaking treaties. The band that took us, they were led by a man named Naichi. He could have killed us 12 times over, but instead, he made us earn our keep." "You lived with them?" "Had no choice at first. They kept us tied up for months, moving camp to camp, but eventually..." He rubbed his jaw, fingers tracing the scar she'd noticed. "This came from trying to escape too early. After that, I learned patience, learned their language, their ways. When Samuel took sick with fever, they even tried to heal him. Didn't work, but they tried." Clara found herself leaning against a mesquite trunk, legs suddenly weak. All those nights she'd imagined him dead. He'd been alive, living among their enemies. "Why didn't you come back?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "When you escaped, why didn't you come home?" Eli's eyes met hers, and the pain there took her breath away. "I tried. Clara, God knows I tried. But I was half dead when I got away, wandering the desert for days before some Mexican traders found me. Took months to heal up enough to travel. Then, when I finally made it to Fort Griffin, I heard..." "What?" "I heard Silas Trenton was courting you." His voice went flat. "Heard your ma was sick, that you needed what he could provide. What right did I have to come back and complicate things? A man who'd been gone so long, who had nothing to offer but himself? You had every right." The words exploded from her. We were children. Clara, making promises we couldn't keep." She slapped him. The crack echoed in the small grove, sending a mockingbird fleeing from the branches above. Eli didn't flinch, didn't even raise a hand to his reddening cheek. "Don't you dare," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare diminish what we had. I waited for you. I wore black for a year, and when Mama got sick and the money ran out, when Silas started coming around with his offers and his promises, do you know what kept me from saying yes for so long?" Eli remained silent. "The thought that somewhere, somehow, you might still be alive, that you'd keep your promise and come back to me." She laughed bitterly. "But you were too busy playing noble to even send word you were alive. I thought you'd be better off without knowing." Without the chance to choose for myself? She wiped at her tears angrily. You men are all the same, making decisions for us like we're children who can't think for ourselves. That's not— He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. It was longer than he used to wear it, falling past his collar. You're right, I was a coward. I stood outside town for hours yesterday, trying to decide whether to ride in or keep going. Then I saw you at the well, and what? And I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my life staying away. He stepped closer, and Clara caught her breath at the intensity in his eyes. But I also saw that ring on your finger. Clara, in 3 days, you'll be another man's wife. What good does it do, me being here now? She wanted to tell him about the loveless arrangement, about the cold calculation behind Silas's proposal, but the words stuck in her throat. What did it matter? The contracts were signed, the wedding planned. Her mother's life depended on it. No good at all, she said quietly. They stood in silence, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Finally, Eli nodded. Then I'll be moving on after the wedding. Thought about heading north to Montana territory. Heard there's good land up there for a man willing to work it. That's probably best. He turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, Clara, I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day passed that I didn't picture your face, hear your laugh. The Apache have a saying that some spirits are bound together across all worlds. I used to think that was just fancy talk. But now— He shook his head. Be happy, Clara. That's all I want for you. She watched him walk away, his figure soon swallowed by the bustle of Main Street. Her cheek still stung where her tears had dried, and her chest felt hollow, like something vital had been carved out. Back at the cabin, she found her mother awake and more lucid than she'd been in days. I heard the commotion in town, Margaret said weakly. Is it true? Is Eli back? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Oh, my dear girl. Her mother's thin hand found hers. I'm so sorry. It doesn't matter. Nothing's changed. Margaret's eyes, still sharp despite her illness, studied her daughter's face. I've lived long enough to know that everything can change in a heartbeat. The question is whether we're brave enough to let it. That evening, as Clara altered the wedding dress by lamplight, she tried not to think about Eli out there somewhere in the darkness, tried not to imagine what might have been if he'd returned even a month ago, before she'd given Silas her word. A soft knock at the door made her look up. She opened it to find old Moses, who worked at the livery stable, holding a small wooden carving. Mister, Eli asked me to give you this. Miss Clara, he said, tipping his worn hat, said you'd understand. After he left, Clara held the carving up to the light. It was a small horse, intricately detailed, just like the ones Eli used to whittle for her when they were young. But this one was different, marked with tiny scars and imperfections, yet somehow more beautiful for them. She traced the miniature wounds with her finger, understanding the message. They were both changed, both scarred by the years apart. The boy and girl who'd made promises by the creek were gone. But what remained? Was it enough? Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Clara clutched the wooden horse to her chest, feeling more lost than she had in 3 long years. 2 days before the wedding, Clara threw herself into preparations with desperate fervor. She scrubbed the cabin floor until her knuckles bled, mended every piece of clothing she owned, and baked enough bread to last her mother a week. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to dangerous places. The women's auxiliary had taken over the church, hanging white ribbons and arranging wildflowers under Mrs. Trenton's, Silas's late mother's, exacting supervision. Clara avoided town as much as possible, but when she did venture in for supplies, she felt Eli's presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. He kept his distance, respecting the boundaries she'd drawn, but she knew he was there. Clara, dear, you're looking peaked, Mrs. Trenton observed when Clara delivered a batch of preserves to the church. The older woman's steel-gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, her black bombazine dress impeccable despite the heat. I do hope you're not coming down with something. Silas would be most disappointed if the wedding had to be postponed. I'm quite well, Mrs. Trenton. Just tired from the preparations. The woman's sharp eyes missed nothing. I heard that Carter boy has returned. Such unfortunate timing. Clara kept her expression neutral. I hadn't noticed the timing being particularly significant. Hadn't you? Well, perhaps that's for the best. Silas doesn't like complications. The threat in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. I trust you understand the importance of this union for everyone involved. That evening, Clara sat with her mother, reading from the Bible as had become their nightly ritual. Margaret's breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle that made Clara's chest tight with fear. You don't have to do this, Margaret whispered suddenly. Clara set the Bible aside. Mama, please, we've discussed this. Have we? Or have you just decided what's best without truly considering the cost? Margaret's eyes, so like Clara's own, held a depth of understanding that was almost painful. I've been thinking about Eli's mother, Sarah. We were girls together. You know, she died bringing him into this world. And his father, well, he did his best, but Eli practically raised himself. Why are you telling me this? Because that boy has been alone most of his life. Clara, and when he finally found someone to love, you, the world took that away too. Margaret paused to catch her breath. I won't be responsible for taking it away again. You're not taking anything. I'm choosing this. For you. No. The word came out stronger than anything Margaret had said in weeks. If you marry Silas Trenton, you do it for yourself or not at all. I won't have my daughter sacrificing her happiness for a few more months of life. Mama, I mean it. Clara, I'd rather die tomorrow with you happy than live a year knowing I'd condemned you to a loveless marriage. Before Clara could respond, footsteps on the porch made them both freeze. Clara rose, expecting to find Silas or one of his men. Instead, Eli stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Forgive the intrusion, Mrs. Whitmore, he said softly. I heard you were poorly, and I wanted to pay my respects. Margaret's face transformed with a smile that took years off her appearance. Eli Carter, come here, boy, and let me look at you. Clara watched, heart aching, as Eli knelt beside her mother's bed. Margaret reached out with trembling fingers to touch the scar on his face. You've had a hard road, she said. Yes, ma'am, but I'm here now. Yes, you are. Margaret glanced at Clara. Would you give us a moment, dear? Fetch some water from the well. Clara wanted to protest, but the look in her mother's eyes brooked no argument. She grabbed the bucket and headed outside, though she moved slowly, straining to hear the murmured conversation within. When she returned, Eli was standing to leave. Thank you for visiting, Clara said stiffly. I'm sure Mother appreciated it. Clara! His voice stopped her as she turned away. Walk with me, just to the gate, please. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her feet moved of their own accord, following him out into the cooling evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her painfully of all the sunsets they'd watched together as youngsters. Your mother's a wise woman, Eli said finally. What did she say to you? Nothing I didn't already know. That I'm a fool, that I should have come back sooner, that you deserve better than what either Silas or I can offer you. They reached the gate, but neither made a move to part. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, the notes pure and achingly sweet. I went to see him today, Eli said suddenly. Silas. Clara's blood ran cold. You did what? Relax. I didn't challenge him to a duel or anything foolish. Just wanted to size up the man who's going to... He stopped, jaw clenching. He's already got the house prepared for you. Showed me the room where your mother will stay, the nurse he's hired from San Antonio. It's more than I could ever provide. Eli, no, let me finish. I've spent 3 years learning to survive. Clara, living rough, fighting to stay alive. What kind of life could I offer you? A cabin in Montana that might not survive the first winter? Uncertainty? Hardship? You'd offer me love, Clara said quietly, The words hung between them like a physical thing. Eli's face contorted with pain, and suddenly he was reaching for her, pulling her against him with desperate strength. God, Clara, don't you think I know that? Don't you think it's killing me, knowing you'll be in his bed in 2 days, that you'll wear his ring, bear his name, give him children that should have been mine? She was crying again, her tears soaking into his shirt. Then ask me not to. Ask me to run away with you tonight, right now. He pulled back to look at her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. For a moment, she thought he would. She could see the war in his eyes, the desperate want battling with something else. Your mother, he said finally, the words emerging like they'd been torn from him. She needs that doctor, that medicine. Without Silas's money. She told me she'd rather die than see me unhappy. And could you live with that? Could you wake up every morning in our cabin in Montana, knowing she died because you chose love over duty? Clara wanted to say yes, wanted to be the kind of woman who could choose her own happiness without guilt, but they both knew the truth. She would carry that burden forever, and eventually, it would poison whatever happiness they found. I hate you, she whispered, but her arms tightened around him. I know, he said into her hair. I hate myself, too. They stood there as the stars began to appear, holding each other with the desperate grip of the drowning. Finally, Silas's dogs began barking in the distance, and Clara knew his evening visit was imminent. Go, she said, pushing away from Eli. Please, I can't bear this anymore. He caught her hand as she turned, pressing something into her palm. I carved it the night I decided to come back, the night I finally understood that surviving wasn't the same as living. She didn't look at the object until he disappeared into the darkness. It was another wooden figure, but this time of 2 horses, running side by side, their manes flowing together so intricately carved that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. When Silas arrived minutes later, Clara had composed herself, hiding the carving beneath her mother's Bible. He studied her with those cold gray eyes, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and flushed cheeks. Pre-wedding nerves? He asked, though his tone suggested he knew better. Something like that. Clara replied, I heard Carter visited your mother today. His voice was casual, but she caught the edge beneath it. That was kind of him. They were fond of each other once. He wanted to pay his respects. Of course. Silas moved closer, his hand coming to rest possessively on her waist. I trust that's all he wanted. Clara forced herself not to flinch from his touch. What else could there be? He smiled then, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Indeed, what else could there be between a dying woman and a dead man? He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. Because that's what he is. Clara, dead. He just doesn't know it yet if he tries to interfere with what's mine. The threat was unmistakable. Clara's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. There's nothing to interfere with. Silas, I gave you my word. Yes, you did. And I'm a man who values keeping one's word above all else. Remember that, my dear. After he left, Clara sat in the darkness for a long time. The wooden horses clutched in her hand. Tomorrow was her last day of freedom, her last day as Clara Whitmore, her last day to dream of what might have been. In the distance, she heard the lonely whistle of the night train, carrying people to new lives and new possibilities. But for her, the track was set, the destination fixed. All that remained was to board and try to find some peace in the journey. The night before her wedding, Clara couldn't bear the suffocating walls of the cabin. Her mother had fallen into a fitful sleep, and the white dress hung like a specter in the corner, seeming to glow in the moonlight. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and slipped out into the darkness. Her feet carried her without conscious thought, following paths worn by years of memory. The old settler's cabin on Henderson Hill had been abandoned since the Comanche raids of '71. But she and Eli had claimed it as their secret place years ago. She didn't expect to find him there. It would be too painful, too dangerous. She just needed somewhere to breathe. But as she crested the hill, she saw the faint glow of a fire through the broken windows. Her heart hammered as she approached, knowing she should turn back, knowing nothing good could come from this. Yet her feet continued forward until she stood in the doorway. Eli sat by a small fire in the old hearth, his back to her, whittling. He didn't turn, but his hands stilled. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you." He finally looked at her, and the raw pain in his eyes took her breath away. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about tomorrow, about you walking down that aisle to another man. Figured I'd spend one last night in a place that still felt like ours." Clara entered despite every warning bell in her mind. The cabin held so many memories. Afternoons spent talking about their dreams, stolen kisses when they thought no one would find them, plans for a future that now would never be. "Do you remember?" she said softly. "When we carved our initials in that beam?" Eli's gaze went to the wooden beam above the door, where EC plus CW was still visible despite the years. "I remember everything. Clara, every moment." She sat across from him, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. They didn't speak for a long time, the crackling flames and distant coyote calls the only sounds. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "Tell me about the Apache. Tell me about those years." Eli set down his knife and the piece of wood he'd been carving. "Why do you want to know?" "Because they're years we should have had together. Because I need to understand what changed you. Because—" her voice caught. "Because after tomorrow, we'll never have the chance to talk like this again." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the fire, he began to speak. "The first months were the hardest. They kept us bound, moving constantly. I kept thinking someone would come for us, that the army would track us down. But the Apache know that land like their own souls. We could have been ghosts for all the trace we left." He told her about learning to survive on little water, about the elder woman who'd treated his wounds with poultices that burned like fire but healed clean, about watching Samuel grow weaker despite all efforts to save him, and holding his hand as he died with his wife's name on his lips. Naichi, their leader. He found me afterward trying to dig a grave with my bare hands. The ground was too hard. Rocky. He stopped me, said something in Apache I didn't understand then. Later, I learned it meant the earth will take him when it's ready. They have different ways of honoring their dead. Clara found herself leaning forward, drawn by the quiet intensity of his voice. "When did they start trusting you?" Trust might be too strong a word, but acceptance. That came the day raiders from another band attacked their camp. They'd untied me to help move supplies. And when the shooting started, I had a choice: run or fight beside them. He smiled grimly. "I picked up a rifle and fought. After that, things changed." "You fought against other Apache?" "Against anyone who threatened the camp. There were women and children there. Clara, whatever else people say about them, they love their families same as we do, maybe more, considering what they've lost to our expansion." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, though the night wasn't cold. "Is that when you got the scar?" Eli's hand went unconsciously to his face. "No, that came later, during my escape. One of the younger warriors, Grey Wolf, he figured out I was planning to run. We fought. He could have killed me. But at the last second, he let me go, said I'd earned my freedom, even if I was a fool to leave." He paused. "Sometimes I wonder if he was right." "How can you say that? You were a captive." "Was I? By the end. I'm not sure. They taught me to track, to survive on nothing, to read sign in ways I never imagined. I learned their language, their stories, started to see the world through their eyes, the sacred places we'd built our towns on, the buffalo we'd slaughtered to nothing, the promises we'd broken again and again." Clara studied his profile in the firelight. "You sound like you admire them." "I respect them," he corrected. "They're losing everything, and they know it. But they keep fighting, keep trying to preserve their way of life. There's honor in that, even if we're on opposite sides." They fell silent again. Clara knew she should leave. knew every moment here made tomorrow harder, but she couldn't make herself move. "I wrote you letters," Eli said suddenly, "in my head, during those years, hundreds of them, telling you about the sunrises that painted the mountains purple and gold, about the time I helped deliver a baby when the women were away from camp, about the stories the elders told around the fire, myths that reminded me of the Bible stories your mother used to read to us." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. "I wish I could have read them. I'll write them for you someday, mail them to Montana, and you can read them when—" He stopped, unable to finish. "When I'm an old woman and Silas is gone." Clara laughed bitterly. "When it's too late for anything but regret?" Eli moved then, coming around the fire to kneel beside her. "Clara, don't. We can't think that way." "Why not? It's the truth. Tomorrow I'll marry him, and we'll pretend this never happened. You'll go to Montana, I'll be Mrs. Trenton, and we'll both spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs wiping away her tears. "Then let's not wonder. Let's have tonight." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Clara knew she should pull away, should run back to her cabin and bar the door against temptation. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "Just tonight," she whispered. His lips met hers with 3 years of longing, 3 years of loss, 3 years of love that had never died. She responded with equal desperation, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The fire crackled beside them as they rediscovered each other, mapping the changes time had wrought while finding the familiar beneath. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Eli rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. Clara, I've loved you since we were children, and I'll love you until they put me in the ground." "I love you too," she breathed. "God help me, I never stopped." They held each other by the dying fire, sharing whispered words and stolen touches, trying to fit a lifetime into a single night. Clara told him about the long months of grief, about waking up expecting to see him and remembering he was gone. He told her about the nightmares that still plagued him, about learning to find peace in Apache rituals, about the moment he decided to come home. "It was a full moon," he said. Clara nestled against his chest. "I was sitting watch, and I saw this couple in the camp. They'd been married 40 years, still looked at each other like newlyweds, and I thought, that should be us. That would have been us. And I knew I had to at least see you again, even if from a distance." "I'm glad you came back," Clara said softly. "Even if it hurts, even if it changes nothing. These moments, they're worth the pain." As dawn approached, they reluctantly pulled apart. The fire had died to embers, and the first birds were beginning their morning songs. Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, trying to smooth her hair. "I should go. Mother will wake soon, and there are preparations." Eli rose too, catching her hand before she could leave. "Clara, don't." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Whatever you're going to say, don't. We've said everything that matters." He kissed her fingers, then let her go. "Be happy, Clara, however you can. Promise me that." She couldn't promise that, couldn't lie to him. Instead, she kissed him one last time, pouring everything she couldn't say into that final touch. Then she walked away, not looking back, knowing if she did, she'd never have the strength to leave. The sun was rising as she reached her cabin, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her wedding day had arrived. In a few hours, she would put on that white dress and speak vows to a man she didn't love. But for one night, she had been truly alive again. For one night, she had been Eli's Clara instead of Silas's bride. It would have to be enough. Clara had barely slept an hour when Silas appeared at the cabin door, his presence filling the small space like smoke. She was still in her day dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she saw his eyes narrow as he took in her appearance. "Where were you last night?" His voice was deceptively calm, like the stillness before a tornado. "I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk to clear my head." The lie came easier than she expected. "A walk?" He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. Mrs. Patterson saw you heading toward Henderson Hill after midnight. Curious place for a walk. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I've always gone there to think. It's peaceful. Is that so? Silas reached out and plucked a small twig from her hair, one she'd missed. And you think alone, I suppose? Of course. His hand shot out, gripping her chin hard enough to bruise. Don't lie to me, Clara. I know he was there. My men saw the smoke from the chimney. She jerked away from his grip. Then why ask me? Because I wanted to see if you'd have the decency to be honest, but I see you're already practicing deception. And we're not even married yet. His gray eyes were like winter ice. Perhaps I should reconsider this arrangement. Clara thought of her mother, of the medicines that kept her breathing easier, of the doctor's bills that would crush them without Silas's money. Perhaps you should. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a cold, calculating expression. No, I don't think so. You see, I've invested too much in this already. Your mother's treatments, the house preparations, the announcement in 3 counties. A man like me doesn't back out of a deal once it's made. Then what do you want? I want my wife to understand her place. I want her to know that I own her, body and soul, from the moment she says I do. And I want her to know what happens to things I own when they disappoint me. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Clara, your friend Mr. Carter had an unfortunate encounter with some of my ranch hands this morning. Nothing fatal, you understand. Just a reminder that he's outstayed his welcome in Dustridge. I trust he'll be moving on directly. Clara waited until his footsteps faded before running to the window. In the distance, she could see dust rising from the main road, riders heading toward town. Without thinking, she grabbed her mother's medical bag and ran. She found Eli at the blacksmith's, Sam Morrison's widow, Ruth, tending to his wounds. His face was a mess of bruises, one eye swollen shut, and his ribs were wrapped in bandages. Clara, you shouldn't be here, Ruth said gently. It's your wedding day. Let me. Clara took the cloth from Ruth's hands, her own shaking as she saw the extent of the damage. How many were there? 4, Eli said through split lips. Maybe 5. Hard to count when they're coming at you from all sides. This is my fault. Tears blurred her vision as she carefully cleaned a cut on his cheek. I shouldn't have come last night. I shouldn't have. Stop! He caught her wrist, his grip gentle despite his injuries. Last night was the first time I've felt alive in 3 years. I'd take 100 beatings for 1 more hour with you. Ruth quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Clara continued tending his wounds, each bruise and cut a testament to Silas's cruelty. You have to leave, she said finally. Today, before he does worse. I'm not running from Silas Trenton. This isn't about pride. Eli, he'll kill you. He all but promised it. Eli struggled to sit up, wincing. Maybe that's better than watching you marry him. Maybe. No. The word came out fierce. You don't get to die on me again. You survived the Apache. You survived the desert. You'll survive this. You'll go to Montana, build that ranch, live the life you dreamed of. Without you, it's not a life. It's just existing. She was crying openly now, not caring who might see through the shop windows. Promise me you'll leave today. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you want. It's what has to be. She finished bandaging his wounds, then stood to go. At the door, she turned back. For what it's worth, Eli Carter, last night was the first time I felt alive in 3 years, too. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock. Clara returned home to find the ladies' auxiliary already there, ready to help her prepare. They clucked over her red eyes and pale complexion, attributing it to wedding nerves. Her mother watched from her bed, saying nothing but seeing everything. As the women laced her into the white dress, Clara felt like she was preparing for her own funeral. Each ribbon tied, each button fastened, was another bar in the prison she was entering. Mrs. Henderson fixed her hair, weaving in small white flowers while chattering about what a lucky girl she was. Such a handsome man, Mr. Trenton, and so generous. Why, the donation he made to the church building fund was simply extraordinary." Clara made appropriate noises, but her mind was elsewhere. Was Eli packing? Had he already left? She found herself straining to hear hoofbeats that might signal his departure, both dreading and hoping for them. "Clara!" Her mother's weak voice cut through the chatter. "Might I have a moment alone with my daughter before we leave for the church?" The women reluctantly filed out, leaving Clara sitting on the bed beside her mother. Margaret reached up with trembling fingers to touch her daughter's face. "You don't have to do this," she said again. "Yes, I do." Clara tried to smile. "It's all arranged. The guests are gathering. The minister is waiting. It would be a scandal to call it off now. Scandal fades. Regret lasts forever. So does guilt. If I don't marry him, if you—" She couldn't finish. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my brave, foolish girl. Don't you know I'd rather have one more day with you happy than a year watching you die inside?" A knock at the door interrupted them. "The carriage is here." "Mrs." Henderson called. Clara kissed her mother's forehead. "It's time." The ride to the church passed in a blur. Clara saw the faces of townspeople gathered to watch, some smiling, others wearing expressions of pity or knowing. Did everyone know about last night? Did they all see her for what she was, a woman about to betray every vow she spoke? At the church, Silas waited at the altar, resplendent in a black suit that emphasized his cold handsomeness. His smile when he saw her held triumph rather than love, possession rather than tenderness. The organist began to play, and Clara's feet moved of their own accord down the aisle. Halfway to the altar, she saw him. Eli stood at the back of the church, hidden in the shadows by the door. His face was still swollen, but his eyes held such love and pain that she nearly stumbled. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Patterson began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Silas Trenton and Clara Whitmore." The words washed over her like water over stone. She responded when prompted, her voice sounding distant and unfamiliar. Silas's hand was cold as it held hers, his grip just tight enough to remind her of his earlier threats. "If anyone here present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The church fell silent. Clara found herself holding her breath, her eyes drawn inexorably to the back of the church. For a moment, she thought Eli might speak, might stride forward and claim her in front of everyone, but he remained silent, and the moment passed. "Do you, Clara May Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She opened her mouth to speak the words that would seal her fate. But as she did, a commotion erupted outside. Horses thundering up to the church, men shouting. The church doors burst open, and Jake Wilson, one of the ranch hands, ran in. "Indians!" he shouted. "Apache raiding party heading this way!" The church erupted in panic. Women screamed. Men reached for guns they'd left at the door. Silas released Clara's hand, barking orders to his men. In the chaos, Clara felt a hand grasp hers. Eli pulled her into an alcove, his face intense. "This is our chance," he said urgently. "In the confusion, we can slip away, start fresh somewhere they'll never find us." Clara looked at the pandemonium around them, at Silas organizing the defense, at her mother being helped to safety by the church women. The moment of decision had come in a way she'd never expected. "My mother." "We'll send for her when we're settled, I promise." Through the window, she could see dust rising in the distance. The Apache were coming, and with them, either death or deliverance. Clara had seconds to choose, honor and duty, or love and freedom. She looked into Eli's battered face, saw the boy she'd loved and the man he'd become, and made her choice. The chaos in the church provided perfect cover as Clara and Eli slipped out through the vestry door. But Clara's heart sank as she realized the Apache raid was nothing more than a small hunting party passing through the valley. Already the shouts were dying down as men recognized there was no real threat. "We have to get my mother," Clara said. hiking up her wedding dress to run faster. They reached the cabin to find Silas already there, his face dark with rage. Two of his men held Eli back while Silas gripped Clara's arm. "Did you really think you could humiliate me like this?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Leave me standing at the altar while you run off with this saddle tramp? Let her go, Trenton!" Eli growled, struggling against the men holding him. Silas backhanded Clara, sending her sprawling. "You're bought and paid for, woman. Every meal your mother ate, every dose of medicine, every moment of comfort she's had, that was my money. You owe me." "I'll pay you back," Clara said, tasting blood. "Every cent." "With what?" Silas laughed coldly. "You have nothing. You are nothing without me." He turned to his men. "Take Carter out back. Make sure he understands what happens to those who interfere with my property." "No!" Clara threw herself at Silas, clawing at his face. "I'll marry you. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt him." Silas caught her wrists, his grip crushing. "Too late for that, my dear. You've shown your true colors. But don't worry, you'll still be my wife, after I'm done teaching your lover a lesson. We'll finish what we started, and you'll spend the rest of your life paying for this embarrassment." From inside the cabin came Margaret's voice, weak but clear. "Silas Trenton, you come in here this instant." Something in her tone made everyone pause. Silas released Clara and entered the cabin, the others following. Margaret lay propped up in bed, but there was steel in her eyes that Clara hadn't seen in months. "You want your money back?" Margaret said. "Fine. Look in that chest by the window." Silas opened the chest and pulled out a leather portfolio. His expression changed as he read the papers inside. "What is this?" "The deed to the Whitmore homestead. All 640 acres of it, including the water rights to Miller's Creek, my late husband's family's land, kept in trust." Margaret's smile was sharp. "Worth considerably more than what you've spent on my care, I'd say." Clara stared at her mother in shock. "Mama, you said we lost the homestead. You said Papa gambled it away." "I lied," Margaret said simply. "I knew someday a man like Silas might come along, thinking he could buy you. I needed insurance." She looked at Silas. "Take the land and go. It's better than trying to force a marriage that would only bring misery to everyone." Silas studied the papers, calculating. The Whitmore homestead included some of the best grazing land in the county. With crucial water access, it was worth far more than a reluctant bride. "You've been playing a long game, Mrs. Whitmore," he said finally. "A mother does what she must to protect her child." The tension in the room stretched taut. "Finally." Silas nodded to his men to release Eli. "The land in exchange for releasing Clara from our engagement. But know this," he looked at Clara. "You're no longer welcome in Dustridge. Either of you. My reach is long, and my memory longer." He took the papers and strode out, his men following. Clara rushed to her mother's side. "Mama, how could you? That land was our future, our security." "No, child." Margaret touched her face gently. "You are your own future. Land can be lost or stolen or burned. But love, real love, that's the only security worth having." Over the next hours, the full implications of what had happened spread through town. Clara's dramatic exit from her own wedding became the scandal of the decade, and Silas made good on his threat. No one would sell to them. No one would help them. The doctor, under pressure from Silas, refused to continue treating Margaret. That night, as Clara and Eli tried to plan their next move, fire broke out in the cabin. Whether by accident or design, they'd never know. Eli managed to pull both women to safety, but the cabin was lost, along with everything they owned except what they could carry. They huddled in the ruins as dawn broke. Margaret wrapped in the only blanket they'd saved. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a monumental effort. "We need to get her somewhere safe," Clara said desperately. "Maybe Fort Worth." "No." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "No more running. I'm tired. Clara, so very tired." As if summoned by their desperation, riders appeared on the horizon. Clara's heart sank, expecting Silas's men, but as they drew closer, she saw they were Apache, led by a man whose bearing spoke of authority. Eli stood slowly, raising his hand in greeting. "Nich," he said. The Apache leader dismounted, his dark eyes taking in the scene, the burned cabin, the sick woman, the desperation on their faces. He spoke to Eli in Apache, gesturing to Margaret. "He says his medicine woman might help." Eli translated. "But we'd have to go with them." Clara looked at their destroyed home, at her dying mother, at the man she loved standing ready to protect them despite his injuries. There was nothing left for them here. "Yes," she said. They fashioned a travois for Margaret, and the strange party set off into the hills. Clara rode beside Eli, still in her scorched and torn wedding dress, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. The Apache camp was hidden in a box canyon, protected by high walls and fed by a clear spring. The medicine woman, ancient and sharp-eyed, immediately took charge of Margaret, brewing teas and applying poultices that eased her breathing. "Why are you helping us?" Clara asked Naichi through Eli's translation. The Apache leader's answer was long and complex, but Eli summarized. "He says I earned the right to ask for aid when I lived among them. Also, he's curious about the woman who could make me return to the white man's world. He says anyone who would give up everything for love might understand what his people have lost." Days passed in the camp. Clara learned to help the women with their work, her hands busy with unfamiliar tasks. At night, she and Eli would sit with Margaret, who seemed to gain strength from the mountain air and the medicine woman's treatments. "I misjudged them," Margaret said one evening, watching Apache children play. "We all did. They're just people trying to survive. Same as us. Their way of life is ending," Eli said quietly. "Naichi knows it. That's why some of the young men want to fight. They'd rather die as warriors than live on reservations." "And you?" Clara asked. "What do you want?" He took her hand. "I want to build something that lasts. A place where we can live in peace, where the past doesn't matter. Maybe that's Montana, maybe it's somewhere else. But wherever it is, I want to build it with you." A commotion at the camp entrance drew their attention. A young Apache scout was reporting to Naichi, gesturing urgently. Eli listened, his face growing grim. "Soldiers," he translated. "A large patrol heading this way. Silas must have reported that we're with hostiles. They'll be here by tomorrow." The camp erupted in activity, some prepared to fight, others to flee. Naichi approached them as darkness fell. "He says we've brought danger to his people," Eli said. "He doesn't blame us, but we need to go. He'll give us horses and supplies, and one of his men will guide us north to the old trading paths." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. These people had shown them more kindness than their own community, and now they were forced to flee because of it. That night, the medicine woman came to Margaret one last time. She spoke at length, Eli translating in pieces. "She says your mother's spirit is strong, but her body is tired. The journey ahead." He paused, struggling with the words. "She says Margaret must choose whether to fight for more time or let go peacefully." Margaret reached for both Clara and Eli's hands. "I've seen my daughter choose love over fear. I've seen kindness from those we called enemies. I've had more in these few days than many get in a lifetime." She smiled. I think I'm ready to rest." "Mama, no. Hush, child. I'll go knowing you're free, knowing you're loved. That's all any mother really wants." As the first stars appeared, Margaret Whitmore closed her eyes for the last time, her face peaceful in the firelight. The Apache women helped Clara prepare her mother's body, wrapping her in beautiful blankets, honoring her as one of their own. They buried her at dawn in the Apache way, high on a hillside facing east, as the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Clara felt something shift inside her. The guilt and obligation that had bound her for so long dissolved, leaving only grief, clean and sharp and bearable, because Eli was beside her. She was right. Clara whispered, "Love is the only security worth having." As the soldier's dust cloud appeared on the horizon, Clara and Eli mounted the horses Naichi had given them. The Apache were already fading into the mountains, disappearing like smoke into hidden valleys and secret paths. "Ready?" Eli asked. Clara looked back once at the hillside where her mother rested, then forward to the unknown trail ahead. "Yes," she said, and meant it. They rode north as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the ashes of their old lives, carrying only love and hope into whatever future awaited them. The journey north tested them in ways Clara had never imagined. They followed old trading routes and deer paths, avoiding main roads where Silas's influence might reach. Their Apache guide, a young man named Gray Wolf, the same warrior who'd given Eli his scar, led them through the first week before disappearing one dawn. His duty complete. "He left us food," Eli said, finding the carefully wrapped bundle of dried meat and cornmeal. "And this," he held up a small piece of turquoise on a leather cord. "For protection," he said. Clara touched the stone, thinking of all the kindness they'd received from unexpected sources. "Will we ever see them again?" "Probably not. The army will push them onto reservations soon enough." Eli's voice was heavy with regret. "But they'll survive. They always have." They pressed on, two souls against the vastness of the frontier. Clara had traded her ruined wedding dress for practical clothes bartered from a Mexican trader, men's trousers and a simple shirt that scandalized what little civilization they encountered. But she'd never felt more herself. 3 weeks into their journey, they reached the Pecos River during spring flood. The usually manageable stream had become a raging torrent. "We'll have to wait it out," Eli said. But Clara could see the worry in his eyes. They were low on supplies, and storm clouds gathered on the horizon. That night, huddled in a cave above the river line, they heard horses approaching. Eli pushed Clara deeper into the shadows, hand on his gun. "Eli Carter," a voice called out. "That you, boy?" An old man emerged from the darkness, leading a pack mule. Clara recognized him, Jacob Hennessy, the trader who told her about his own lost love. "Mr. Hennessy?" Eli stepped out cautiously. "What are you doing out here?" The old man grinned, his weathered face creasing. "Heard there was a couple heading north, running from Silas Trenton's wrath. Figured they might need some help." He began unloading supplies from the mule. "Got coffee, bacon, ammunition, even got something for the lady." He handed Clara a wrapped bundle. Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "Was my Mary's," Jacob said quietly. "Been carrying it 40 years, since she died of the fever. Seems fitting it should go to someone choosing love over sense, just like we did." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this." "Sure you can. Mary would have liked knowing it was on the hand of a woman brave enough to walk away from comfort for something real." He winked at Eli. "Besides, might make things easier in towns ahead if folks think you're properly wed." They shared a meal by the fire, Jacob telling stories of the trail ahead. As he prepared to leave at dawn, he pulled Eli aside. "Silas sent riders north 2 days behind you," he warned. "Take the old Comanche trail through Devil's Canyon. It's rough, but they won't follow you there. Too many ghosts for their liking." Clara shuddered, remembering that was where Eli's party had been ambushed. But Eli just nodded, understanding it might be their only chance. Devil's Canyon lived up to its name. The trail was barely visible, winding through maze-like rock formations and steep drops. They led the horses more than rode, every step careful on the loose shale. Halfway through, they found evidence of old violence, scattered bones, rusted weapons, arrow points embedded in rock. "This is where it happened," Eli said quietly. "Where we were ambushed." Clara took his hand. "But you survived, and now we're both here, alive and free." That night they camped in a sheltered overhang, the same one where Eli had hidden 3 years before, wounded and delirious. He showed her the marks he'd carved in the rock, counting days until he was strong enough to move. "I thought about dying here," he admitted. "Seemed easier than trying to go on. But then I'd think of you, and I'd last another day." Clara held him tight, feeling the weight of those lonely, desperate hours. They made love with gentle intensity, reclaiming the place of near death with life and connection. 2 days later, they emerged from the canyon to find Silas's men waiting. "Well, well," drawled Tom McKnight, Silas's foreman. "The runaway bride and her Apache lover, Mr. Trenton's gonna be real pleased." 4 men, all armed, spread out to surround them. Clara felt Eli tense beside her, calculating odds that weren't in their favor. "Let her go, McKnight," Eli said. "This is between Trenton and me." "Afraid not. He wants you both back. You to hang for horse theft. These are Trenton horses you're riding, after all. And the lady to learn what happens when you break a deal with Silas Trenton." "Like hell," Clara said, drawing the rifle from her saddle. The men laughed. Not taking her seriously. Their mistake. Clara had learned to shoot from her father, and desperation made her steady. Her first shot took McKnight's hat off. The second kicked up dust at his horse's feet. In the confusion, Eli drew and fired, wounding one man in the shoulder. The horses reared and screamed, and for a moment, chaos reigned. "The canyon!" Eli shouted. "Ride!" They wheeled their mounts and plunged back into Devil's Canyon, shots echoing off the rocks behind them. The narrow trail that had been their curse now became their salvation. The men couldn't follow in force, having to come single file. They rode hard, pushing deeper into the maze. Behind them, shouts and curses grew fainter. At a fork in the trail, Eli led them up a steep cut he remembered from his time with the Apache. "They used this to disappear when the army chased them," he explained, helping Clara up a particularly difficult section. "There's a back way out, if I can find it." As darkness fell, they heard McKnight's men making camp below, unwilling to navigate the treacherous paths at night. Clara and Eli pressed on by moonlight, leading the exhausted horses through passages barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Dawn found them on the far side of the canyon, looking down at the river valley beyond. No sign of pursuit, but they didn't slow until they reached a trading post at Fort Sumner 2 days later. The post was rough but welcome, the first civilization they'd seen in weeks. While Eli traded for supplies, Clara wrote a letter to send back to Dustridge, letting people know her mother had died peacefully and they were safe. She signed it, Mrs. Eli Carter, using Jacob's ring to make it true, in spirit, if not in law. "Folks are talking about Indian troubles to the north," Eli said when he returned. "Army's pushing the last free bands onto reservations. Might be safer to swing west through the mountains. Longer, though. Yeah, but I'd rather arrive late than not at all." That evening, they sat outside the post watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Other travelers shared news and gossip. Gold strikes in Colorado, railroad expansion, the changing face of the frontier. "World's getting smaller," one grizzled prospector said. "Won't be many places left for folks to disappear into soon enough." Clara thought about that as they prepared to leave the next morning. The wild places that had sheltered outlaws and dreamers, Apache and wanderers, were shrinking. But maybe that meant it was time to stop running and start building. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked. Seeing her expression, "I'm thinking my mother was right. We can't live in the past or hide from the future. We have to make our own place in whatever world is coming." He smiled, that crooked grin she'd fallen in love with so long ago. "Montana's still there. Good land, they say. Room to build something lasting. Then let's go build it." They rode out as the morning star faded, no longer fugitives but pioneers. Behind them lay grief and loss, broken promises and burned bridges. Ahead waited uncertainty, hardship, the challenge of carving out a life in untamed country. But they rode together, and that made all the difference. In her saddlebags, Clara carried the wooden horses Eli had carved, her mother's Bible saved from the fire, and Jacob's ring on her finger. Small things, but enough to start with. "I love you, Eli Carter," she said as they crested a rise and saw the endless prairie spread before them. "I love you too, Clara Carter," he replied, and spurred his horse forward into their future. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, somewhere behind them. Silas Trenton's men had given up the chase, unwilling to follow into the vast emptiness of the northern territories. The Apache were making their last stands in hidden valleys. The world they'd known was ending. But for Clara and Eli, riding side by side toward the promise of Montana, it was all beginning. Every mile took them further from who they'd been and closer to who they might become. The trail ahead was long and uncertain, but they faced it together, and that was enough. In the distance, mountains rose like promises against the sky, and Clara felt her mother's spirit riding with them. Finally, at peace. Love had won. Against all odds and expectations, love had led them through fire and canyon, past bitterness and bullets, to this moment of infinite possibility, and love would carry them home. 8 months later, Montana Territory proved to be everything they'd hoped and more. The cabin stood solid against the mountain wind, built with their own hands from pine and stone. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms and a loft. But it was theirs, earned with sweat and determination rather than obligation or fear. Clara stood in her small garden, hands deep in the rich soil, planting seeds for their second spring. The mountains rose around them like cathedral walls, snow-capped peaks catching the morning light. A creek ran just beyond the cabin, its music constant and soothing. Letter came. Eli called from the porch. He'd ridden to the nearest town, 2 days there and back, for supplies and news. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, a practical one now, not the frilly things she'd worn in Dustridge. The letter was from Ruth Morrison, Samuel's widow, one of the few who dared maintain correspondence despite Silas's influence. Silas married the banker's daughter from Fort Worth. Clara read aloud. Apparently she came with significant debt that even the Whitmore land couldn't cover. He's had to sell off parts of his ranch to stay afloat. She looked up at Eli. I suppose there's justice in that. I suppose. Eli's voice held no satisfaction. Only a sort of tired peace. What else? The Apache Naiche's band surrendered last winter. They're on the reservation in Oklahoma now. Clara's voice caught. She says Gray Wolf was killed in the final fight. They stood in silence, remembering the young warrior who'd helped them escape. The frontier that had shaped them was disappearing, replaced by something newer, maybe safer, but somehow smaller. That evening, as they sat by their own fire with venison stew bubbling and fresh bread cooling, Eli pulled out his carving knife and a piece of pine. What are you making? Clara asked. Figured it's time I taught you. Your hands have learned everything else out here. Might as well learn this, too. She laughed, settling beside him with her own knife and wood. Under his patient guidance, she began to shape something that might, eventually, become a bird. I've been thinking, Eli said as they worked, about what you said that day at Fort Sumner. About building something for the world that's coming, not the one that's going. And maybe we should start a school. Not right away, but someday. This territory's going to be a state eventually. Going to need educated folks to run it right. Clara looked at him in surprise. The boy who'd barely attended school himself was thinking about education for others. The Apache taught me there's more than one way to see the world, he continued. Might be good for children to learn that early. Learn respect for the land, for different ways of thinking. Margaret Whitmore would have loved that idea. Clara said softly, That's what I figured. A way to honor her memory that actually means something. They worked in companionable silence until the moon rose full and bright. Inside the cabin on the shelf Eli had built sat their few treasures. The wooden horses, Margaret's Bible, a piece of turquoise from Gray Wolf, Mary Hennessy's ring that Clara never removed. A wolf howled in the distance, and its mate answered. The sound that once might have frightened Clara now seemed right, a reminder that wilderness still existed, even as civilization crept closer. No regrets? Eli asked, as he did sometimes when the night grew quiet. None, Clara answered, as she always did, and meant it. Spring flowered into summer, the short Montana growing season demanding every moment of daylight. They worked side by side, building a chicken coop, expanding the garden, adding a lean-to for the horses. Other settlers appeared in the valley. A German family, 2 brothers from Ireland, a freed slave from Georgia seeking a new start. They helped each other with barn raisings and harvests, creating community from necessity and shared dreams. In August, the circuit preacher came through, and Clara and Eli stood before him and their neighbors to speak their vows properly. Clara wore her mother's Sunday dress, carefully preserved, and wildflowers in her hair. Eli had trimmed his hair and beard, looking almost respectable except for the scar that would always mark him as a man who'd survived hard things. "Do you, Eli James Carter, take this woman?" This time, there were no interruptions, no doubts, no obligations except love. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, their neighbors cheered and someone brought out a fiddle. They danced on the grass beside the creek, under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. That night, as they lay in their bed, a real bed now, not just blankets on the ground, Clara traced the scar on Eli's face. "Tell me again about that night in the canyon," she said, "when you decided to come back." He'd told her the story before, but she never tired of hearing it. How he'd lain there bleeding, sure he would die, and seen her face in the stars. How he'd promised himself that if he lived, he'd find his way back to her, no matter how long it took. "I knew even then," he said, "that loving you was the truest thing I'd ever done. Everything else, the fighting, the surviving, the running, that was just what I had to do to get back to that truth." September brought the first snow, just a dusting on the peaks. Clara stood at the window, watching it fall. When she felt the first flutter of movement inside her, she placed her hand on her belly, wonder flooding through her. "Eli," she called softly. He came at once, alerted by something in her voice. She took his hand and placed it where hers had been, waiting. There, again, the tiny movement of new life. His eyes widened, then filled with tears she'd rarely seen. "Is it?" "I think so. I've suspected for a while. But now," she smiled, radiant with joy. "By spring, there'll be 3 of us here." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "God, Clara, a baby. Our baby. Scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But happy, so damn happy." They stood together watching the snow fall harder now, beginning to coat the earth in white. The world outside was cold and hard, and changing faster than either of them could fully grasp. The railroad would reach Montana soon, bringing more settlers, more change. The free-roaming life they'd known was ending. But inside their cabin, warmed by the fire they'd built and the love they'd fought so hard to preserve, life grew and flourished. They'd planted themselves in this soil as surely as Clara's garden seeds, and against all odds, they were taking root. "I never stopped loving you, Eli Carter," Clara said, echoing words from a lifetime ago by a Texas creek. "And I never stopped loving you, Clara Carter," he replied, his hand still resting on the promise of their future. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in pristine white. The wolves sang again, closer now, but not threatening, simply marking their territory in the vast wilderness. Soon that wilderness would shrink, tamed by towns and railways and the relentless march of progress. But for tonight, in their small cabin by the creek, 2 souls who had traveled through fire and loss to find each other again held tight to what mattered most. Love had brought them through war and prejudice, through desert and canyon, through goodbye and impossibility to this moment of perfect peace. The oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Clara thought of her mother, resting on an Apache hillside, finally at peace, of Grey Wolf, who'd let Eli go free, of all the unexpected kindness that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked. "That every hard thing was worth it." Clara said, "Every loss, every mile, every tear, because it led us here." "Here," Eli agreed, and kissed her as the snow fell and the fire crackled and their child grew between them. Proof that some loves truly never die. In the morning, they would wake to a transformed world, pristine and new. There would be chores to do, animals to tend, preparations to make for the long winter ahead. Life would continue with its mixture of hardship and joy, as it always had. But for now, they simply held each other and listened to the creek's endless song. Two hearts, finally home, finally whole, finally free. The boy who'd promised to build a house by the water and the girl who'd believed in those promises had found their way through everything the world could throw at them. And in the end, love was enough. Love was everything. Love was the only truth that mattered. Thank you all for listening to this story of love and survival in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of frontier romance and adventure. What did you think of Clara and Eli's journey? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.